Hello, welcome to some more of the 25-hour live show that we did on the 12th and 13th of December at King's Place in London. And what we're going to show you now are some of the conversations about mental health with Claudia Hammond from Radio 4's All in the Mind, and also Dean Burnett, who you can often read his stuff on cosmicshambles.com as well. He's got a fantastic blog post that's gone up very, very recently about bereavement, which I highly recommend you read. And as well as that, we've also got a COVID panel. And if you want to see, if you're still wondering, is it all real? Have a look at Dr. Kevin Fong's face. Look at the exhaustion and the exasperation on it. And as well as that, we have two songs from the astronaut's favourite singer-songwriter, Tanita Tikaram. I hope you enjoy these things.
I think now we're going to go over to Santa Claus. Might be the first of many, or this might be the original and only Santa Claus. Let's find out. Here's Santa Claus. How are you, Santa Claus?
I'm all right. You're right.
Yeah, good. I always forget that you don't have to be jolly till the 24th.
No, it's 2020, man.
So, I mean, how are you reacting to the situation in terms of how are you changing your outfit at the moment?
I'm all right. You know, it's I didn't know it was a pandemic on until September. No one tells me anything unless they want something. So that was a bit of a shock. I'm kind of isolated anyway in a barren wilderness, but I still sort of maintain a good sense of well-being. Scratch my face there gently, and. You know, it's tough. It's tricky. You know, I actually have to isolate now for until Christmas because I'm working, and it involves a lot of travel. So we adapt. We try. We change our output.
So what, in terms of thinking specifically about ideas of how people, because this again, as has been mentioned already, it's a strange Christmas. This is one specific time of socialising that always occurs every year for a large number of people, and is going to be very different for a lot of people, I think, if they behave in a safe manner as well. What are the kind of things we should be looking out for in friends and family as warnings about what might be problems with their mental health?
It's kind of hard to look out for things when you can't actually be that close to people. But I think if everyone sort of pretends something's normal, then that's probably something to keep an eye on in that, because things aren't normal. And it's perfectly fine to admit that and to acknowledge that and to be aware that this time of year is normally quite fun and festive and everyone gets together and has a good time. But at the moment, we can't do that. We're actually, itchy face, we're actually, we are restricted. We are kept away from each other. And I think it's when people are sort of trying to deny that, suppress that, that suggests that they are perhaps not coping as well with the reality of the situation as they could be. And it's one thing which does generally cause a lot of problems in human well-being generally. It's sort of like suppressing or trying to express different emotional states to what you're actually experiencing. And I imagine a lot of people have gone through that this year when you have to sort of soldier on through difficult times and trying to maintain an even keel when you don't really want to do that. So a lot of modern day stress does boil down to that. So having to suppress your actual feelings, your actual sensibilities to maintain a sort of helpful fiction. And that is something to keep an eye on, because obviously if people are trying to be jolly and happy and sort of everything's great and stuff, if you know that they are having other issues behind the scenes, then that probably is something to keep an eye on.
And how would you, again, preparing this time, thinking ahead as much as possible for empathy, just those kind of different ways of, before any situation even arises, just the idea of how should, as you said, also being aware of the fact it's not the same as every other year. We shouldn't just continue as going, everything's fine. What are the best ways of preparing yourself for that? It's
kind of a tricky one in that we are sort of, we're kept at a distance now, and I think it's quite important to look after your own mental well-being first, because Christmas is, we emphasize it's a time of generosity and giving. I tend to do a lot of work at Christmas time to share things with other people, and that is nice. It's really good, but what is it costing you? And I think it's important to notice that if someone is going out of their way to be helpful towards you, when you feel they don't need to, then perhaps point that out. I'll say that this isn't necessary this year. We can put this off. We can hold back. We can reschedule it for the summertime when things are, even if we haven't got a widespread vaccine, then we can perhaps go outdoors more, interact better then. So I think it's important to sort of keep a sense of perspective, and sort of if someone is trying to do too much too fast, then maybe they are having their own issues, or maybe they want to overcome it, maybe they want to struggle through that, and that'll help them. But it's kind of impossible to say with any certainty, but it is kind of a good idea to sort of maintain a sense of perspective on what you're feeling, what they're feeling, and give each other what they need rather than maybe necessarily what they want. That's usually a good rule of thumb anyway, but particularly now.
Claudia, have you found with All in the Mind, have people been writing in with things that are now more specific to perhaps the Christmas period?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that people have been talking about is how they, people are worried about not being able to see the people they'd normally see, but also feeling guilty if they don't feel so good themselves, and feeling that, they have nothing to complain about because other people have, lost relatives or, been in terrible situations where they're trying to work on intensive care wards and experienced all sorts of terrible things, and that they have no right to feel that they're suffering because they haven't had a bad pandemic. But I think we've all had a bad pandemic, and that's absolutely fine. It's all horrible. And so I think trying not to feel guilty about it is a really important thing, that it's okay to, there is loss. We've lost normal life, and that is okay to feel unhappy about that, and to grieve for that is normal and expected, if you like. And adding guilt to it makes it even more difficult.
Would you agree with that in terms of that trying to work out a way? Because I think it does feel like quite a British malaise as well, which is that mustn't grumble, which means that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to be in the spotlight just by occasionally saying, do you know what, I feel a bit down too, but I'm not trying to say that you don't, that you can acknowledge other people's feelings without at the same time making yourself feel as if you're trying to say, but it's about me. And that seems to be a balance that we find quite hard to get.
Yeah, that's definitely that's something which is I think that's a kind of a key point of when it comes to, especially with mental health issues and things like that. It's easy to step back and say objectively my life is going fine, or compared to other people's at least, but that isn't how the brain and mind work. We don't have the subjective stance. We are completely subjective. We know everything from our own experience is our baseline. We're not born into wealth and think, well, I'm very wealthy, I mustn't ever be unhappy ever again, because people have it worse. We don't have that sort of frame of reference. All we have is what we've lived through. And so when you say I'm having a tough time of it, other people are having a worse time of it, yes, that's objectively correct, but it doesn't help me at all. It's the whole thing of, if you say, well, if you've broken your leg, but someone just lost their leg in a war, well, that's worse, but I'm still in a lot of pain right now, and that doesn't change that. And it's really important to sort of keep an eye on that, or keep that sense of perspective of, yes, other people have it worse, but it doesn't mean I have it fine. It's not a binary thing. There are shades of grey, there are gradients, and if you're having a bad time, it's perfectly fine to say that and to admit that. Just because someone else is having a worse one doesn't make you feel, doesn't make yours different. It's again, it's a very subjective thing, and I think recognizing that would be quite helpful.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? That whole problem of pain idea, which is that I think Lorimer Moseley, I don't know if you know the guy who is kind of pain, and he said that one of the first things you have to acknowledge with pain, and I think this is true of both physical and emotional pain, which of course can combine, which is that you have to acknowledge it's real. It doesn't matter, and he gives this great example where he shows this guy who was given the highest dose of morphine possible because he was working on a building site and a nail went through his foot. Right, he was in absolute agony, and he was screaming, and eventually they X-rayed it. They looked at there, and it had gone through the gap between his toes. But he believed, and it doesn't. And that's the thing that I think is so much part of our mental life as well, whether it's through physical pain or emotional pain, which is there's a psychosomatic side as well to dealing with that. And I don't know what the best way of us again being able to acknowledge without brushing aside.
Yeah, no, it's totally. I think this idea of there being mental health and physical health as being two distinct things which occasionally bump up against each other is it's a massive oversimplification at best and actively wrong at worst. And that many mental health problems have distinct physical symptoms. You can, because of the stress chemicals released by the brain into the bloodstream, or just the anxiety of it all causing you to sort of be constantly tense and constantly worked up, and so we can have weight loss, weight gain effects, and it deprives you of sleep, which has consequences. And on the other hand, a physical ailment can result in serious mental health problems. If you have a sort of very severe diagnosis, it's very common to get depression as a result. There's a lot of comorbidity. So this idea that they are distinct entities in their own right is perhaps an unhelpful one overall. People do this thing of comparing mental health problems are just like physical health ones, which is a whole other thing in that they have different approaches, different vibes, and there's different ways of looking at it. But yeah, so I think that's part of the problem when it comes to mental health stuff, in that the only way to really get at it and sort of assess it and recognize it is with the testimony of the individual. So it's kind of hard to say you have this mental health problem and to treat it as a distinct, separate entity. The patient needs to be a lot more involved when it comes to dealing with these things. And yeah, so that suggests that there is a strong sense of perspective, of ego, of subjectivity, and how you feel about it is going to be a big factor in that. Like, some people can have serious mental health ailments and not be aware of it and not know anything's wrong, and some people can have sort of lesser ones and be very consciously aware of it. So yeah, the conscious perception of the whole thing is a really big part of it, and makes things a whole lot more complex.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give away your secret identity, obviously, now, like saying
no.
Peter Buck, but that is that great moment. Now, we don't have enough Welsh Father Christmases, so I'm glad that we had a Welsh Father Christmas. Dean Burnett, as I mentioned before, author of Happy Brain, Idiot Brain. Thank you so much for joining us, and look at what Dean's put. Always worth looking at the stuff that he's writing and the stuff that he's putting up on social media, because there's a lot of stuff out there. And also, as some of you may well know, Dean has had a year that has had some real bleakness in it, and some of the stuff that he's writing, I think, is particularly pertinent to a lot of situations that people may well be dealing with. So thank you very much for joining us, Dean.
This isn't a breakdown.
It's as Dean said, there is something kind of. It feels to me that very much fitted in, Steve, with the way that we've done that. Those things that aren't necessarily meant to happen that occur during our shows, and one of them, I think, is sage mental health advice with someone wearing an ill-fitting Father Christmas beard. I think that definitely fits in. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us. Your book, Art of Rest, which I've read twice now because we did two events that were so far apart. I had to read twice. Is really fantastic, and I'm not allowed to give away number one, am I? But it is the best, isn't it?
Oh, you can give away number one.
Yeah, it's reading! Yeah! Of course it is. Reading's the best. Takes to other worlds. So Claudia's book is out from it's with Canongate, and obviously you can still hear on All in the Mind and all of those things. Thank you very much, Claudia Hammond.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks, Claudia. Now, Steve, I've just got to ask you, because we've been in this room for 8 hours. Did you? I was looking at you, and I've just hit that first point of going. Yeah. Well, we're not quite a quarter of the way through the show yet.
If I've just hit that exact point as well.
Yeah.
That was such a fantastic, last sort of hour or so with Rusty and Claudia and everyone. It's absolutely amazing. But I've definitely have hit that.
That's probably enough for everyone, isn't it?
I think also
they
just
don't
realised
need
that
Stuart Lee. That's all right.
I've also just realised that I haven't really eaten very much.
No, I'm about to go and have. We've got incredible. You won't believe it. Backstage, we have. It's a cup of soup, isn't it?
Is it really?
It's a dried. It's like astronaut food, luxury astronaut food.
Right. Yeah.
You just add hot water, and it becomes a rich soup.
Wow, like a kind of a sort of instant broth almost.
Yeah, you wait. I might have some kind of noodle secret for you by 11 o'clock tomorrow. It's like a pot with a noodle in it.
What?
Just one noodle.
Noodles in a pot?
Multiple noodles.
It's incredible what they can do these days.
It's going to be a pretty exciting
microchips.
weekend for us. Thank you again, by the way, everyone, for coming down. It's kind of a very weird way of having your only real experience on stage in 9 months is doing it in a 25-hour block, and it's really a delight to have you here. And a sense of community, even though I know it's distance, is a really nice thing to have at this time of year. Thank you very much, everyone who's joining us as well out there. And we are allowed a kind of little break now because we're going to have 2 songs from someone who is. I hope I'm doing this right, Trent. Every time you put the thing on, and it's like no. It is Tanita, good. I mentioned this already. I mentioned it last year. There was a beautiful situation where Helen Sharman and Tanita Tikaram met each other for the first time. And Helen took up one of Tanita's songs, and it became a kind of favourite song for a lot of the astronauts, and still is, Window on the World. And it was... And so it was a really nice moment. And since then, I've done a couple of other events with Tanita, and she's very kindly recorded a couple of songs for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, on whichever screen you are looking on, here is Tanita Tikaram.
I saw from the cathedral you were watching me. Yes, I saw from the cathedral what I should be. So take my time and take my lies, as all the others, they want to take my life. so finely stand. What would you make me do to take my time, take my lies? So the others, they want to take my life. Serious for the winter time, to wrench my soul. Whole cotton ears, but I know there must be, yes I know there must be, yes I know there must be a place to go. And you saw me from the cathedral. Well, I'm an ancient heart. You saw me from the cathedral. Here we are, just falling apart. You catch me, I am tired. I want all that you are. And I saw from the cathedral you were leaving me. Yes, I saw from the cathedral you could not see to see. So take my time and take my life. As all the others, they wanna take my life. There wasn't much I could do. I didn't know I was falling for you. I've been so messed up and you were a new day. But how could I know you were a new day? Leading me on. There isn't much I can say. How can
Tanita Tikaram, thank you very much. That is... that was dangerous. Standing on a grand piano, shiny grand piano in socks. There's a lot of jeopardy in that. Now, I should quickly mention, I said I'd make an announcement at 6 o'clock of some of the people that we haven't mentioned, or at least one of the people we haven't mentioned. I think it's going to be around a little bit after 10:30, sometime after 10:30 tonight. Robert Smith from The Cure has specially recorded 3 acoustic versions of songs from 17 Seconds, which is 40 years old this year. And so we're going to be playing that. Robert recorded that for us yesterday and mixed it, and so they're exclusive acoustic tracks that he's done. That was one of the, because we had The Cure were one of our surprise bands, a show we did in Hammersmith about 4 or 5 years ago, and that really was that level of surprise. The only one, my favourite level of surprise was when we had Duran Duran, and that was because Chris Hadfield, we got him. He happened to be doing a book signing in Brighton. I said, Chris, if we paid for a cab, would you come up and introduce Duran Duran? I said, we'll have a 15-minute conversation, and you don't ever have to say Duran Duran. But if at some point you start to talk about the fact, we'll ask you what it's like to see the planet Earth from space. And if you can just keep saying that it's very hard for the planet Earth to be summed up in words alone, planet Earth, etc. And then behind him, behind the curtains, slowly, Duran Duran started playing their single Planet Earth, and then the curtains opened, and that was it. Now, there were young people in the audience who went, who are this band? I don't know. And they looked up Planet Earth, and Planet Earth are the leading Duran Duran tribute act. So they think they've seen the best ever Duran Duran tribute act, which they have because they've seen Duran Duran. So anyway, so Robert Smith's going to be joining us later on. Now we're going to go over to something that we've done. I think this is probably the 4th time that we've done this since April with a panel of experts, which is because, of course, there's been a lot of non-expert opinions about COVID and about the pandemic. And so we've tried as much as possible throughout the year to always make sure there was a platform for people who can give an informed opinion and who are up to date with what's going on in terms of research and our understanding. And so we are joined by, I'm pleased, one person, 2 people we have had before, Dr. Emma Hodcroft, Professor Dan Davis, and also we're joined by Professor Kevin Fong as well. Here they all are. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
And thank you very much, by the way. The reason this all exists is because we started working together as well with the Genetics Society and the Milner Centre as well. So thank you to them. Right, I've been sent in a bunch of questions. I'll just start off before we go through some of the audience questions. And please do feel free to tweet your questions as well if you have any questions you'd like to ask. And just hashtag them 9lessons24. Dan, I think you were the first, I think even before we did a show with you, Emma, I think, Dan, you were on our first panel. So that would have probably been back in April. What do you think has been, in terms of our understanding and the possibilities given us, what has been the biggest change in what we knew in April and what we know now on December the 12th, 2020?
Thanks, Robin. It's very obvious, actually, that the big change is that we know vaccines can work, and that is, it doesn't need a lot of expertise to know that is an unbelievably amazing thing to have happened in that short time. I mean, you just can't overstate how amazing that is. I honestly thought this could go on for many years when we first spoke about this in April, and now it looks like we genuinely are turning a corner because there is evidence that the vaccines coming through really work. So it's just unbelievable that that's happened. That you can't, that couldn't have been easily predicted at the outset back in April.
And Emma, what do you think are the biggest changes in terms of public understanding? Because of course there has been, there's been out there, there's been a lot of kind of, sometimes I would say it does get to the point of crackpot theory, and sometimes dangerous theories, and sometimes dangerous theories expounded by people with, public platforms and radio shows and things like that. In terms of your sense of the change in public understanding, what do you think have been the major changes in the last few months?
I think ways to keep it safe. We've made really big improvements. So
I'll tell you what, Emma, we might come back to you because your sound is very low. So Either that it was, wasn't it? It's not just me, because at this point I'm no longer trusting my brain. So we're going to come back to you, and we're just going to check on that, and then we're going to fix that. Kevin, I'm going to ask you, because you have been, working within the hospital system of over the last 9 months. What is the what have been the biggest challenges for you in terms of some of the public perceptions and what the actual work that you've been doing yourself?
Yeah, so I've been both continuing to work in my hospital at UCLH, but also with NHS England. I am formally the National Clinical Advisor with one of the COVID cells up there. I think for me the hardest thing really has been, watching that first wave go through with such huge amount of support for our frontline teams, and then hitting this second wave, which has been very different in character, and having a lot of the public support really fall away, and then have some of those narratives that say, I don't know what all the fuss is about, your hospitals are empty. They are not empty, quite the reverse. And that's hard. That's hard for people who have given everything every day without a break since the start of this thing, to hear, and to watch that stuff circulate. And you just wish sometimes you could drag them, through the plastic airlock onto your ICUs, wear PPE, and have that conversation right there. So, it's been a difficult time. The first wave for us was a bit like, it was a bit of a sprint, and the second wave is sort of, marathon war of attrition, I think.
Is there anything in particular you can tell? Because I think it's kind of this strange situation, which is for those who have been unaffected by it, you can walk through the streets and you can get that sense of, well, hang on a minute, is any of this really happening? That disparity between what you are dealing with and indeed what people have been dealing with once they have actually been touched by this, and people who just think, well, the world looks exactly the same.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and I think this is something that we've always known. I remember when one of the flu pandemics hit a few years back, they sort of said, one of the reasonable worst case scenarios back then was that 60,000 people would die. But we knew statistically that number of people, you statistically are unlikely to know anyone directly who has died of that disease. And I think we do have trouble, don't we, processing stuff if it absolutely doesn't, if we can't see it ourselves. It's hard. But the terrifying thing about COVID is it doesn't take much to get to the point where everyone is going to know somebody who has been affected and killed by this disease. So if you put that in perspective, if you think about the number of diabetics, as in type 1 diabetics, insulin using diabetics that we all know one or two at least. And when you get to sort of a couple of 100,000 people dead, that is the same level. So if you let this thing run riot, that is where you get to quite quickly. So it is hard, and I understand why it's hard, because if you're not working in the middle of it, if you're not seeing it, if you're not focused on the science, it's almost a defense mechanism to feel that it isn't happening, but it is happening. Take it from me, it's happening.
And Emma, the question I asked you before, really, in terms of what are you seeing as the most positive pieces in terms of bridging that communication between the scientists, between the people in medicine, and to the broader public?
So I think, following on from what Kevin just said, part of it, I hope, is that helping to communicate to people that this is real. We did see over the summer, a lot of, unfortunately, theories about that this was a case-demic, people called it, that it was just testing, but that it had all been just kind of flu in the spring, that there wasn't going to be a second wave, it hadn't come back. I hope that, communication has improved so that people are taking this more seriously now. But what I was going to say originally was that I do think that we've made great strides in helping people understand what the risks are. So I think, when this first started happening in the spring, there was a lot of concern about how do you keep yourself safe, and people were washing all their groceries. They were leaving mail in the back garden for a week because it might be contaminated. Now we know that we don't necessarily have to take those kinds of steps, but unfortunately what we have learned is that a lot of the things that probably do protect us the most are some of the things that help us socialize and meet other people in ways that that were previously safe but aren't safe now. So things like, meeting your family in enclosed rooms, going to restaurants in large groups. So we know a lot more about how to keep safe, but unfortunately, some of these things are harder to execute than just disinfecting surfaces. And I think in some ways that's made them harder to implement.
Thank you. Now, the first one of the audience questions, we've got one, which is, if we'd all just worn masks from the get-go, how much better would this be? Now, I know that's a very hard thing to actually then turn that, but in terms of, and I know we've talked about this before as well, the use of masks. Can you give us, Emma, a little bit of a sense of what they are doing, and indeed see how much we can answer that question of how different it might be if, from a much earlier stage we had been, because it does seem very strange now. Looking back, I remember making a radio show where a couple of days beforehand we went, let's not have an audience, it seems like there's a bit of jeopardy, and within 2 weeks we were in lockdown. And yet all of this was going across Europe, and we were almost like this kind of, well, we won't get it because of Jack Hawkins in the film The Cruel Sea.
Yeah, so it's always hard to look back and think about, if we'd done X, Y, Z differently, how big of a difference would it have made? But I do think we can say fairly concretely that if we had all started wearing masks quite early, which I don't want to overstate, that this would have been really difficult. We had a very different mindset then. It's easy to kind of imagine now because we all do it, but this would have been hard to do. I think we do know it probably would have made a difference, because we know now that masks help catch those micro droplets that have viruses in them. They help catch those from people who are infected, keep them from floating around in the air, and hopefully decrease the chance that they infect someone else. They may also have a small effect of protecting yourself, though this is thought to be considerably less. But I think that certainly if people had been wearing masks, we might have seen many fewer of these kind of super spreader events in particular that happened in indoor settings, like in churches, in the skiing resorts in Ischgl, any of these indoor places where people were really closely together. I also think, however, it might not have prevented things entirely, because masks, the famous Swiss cheese analogy is that everything that we do is a layer of cheese that has some holes in it. So masks themselves they do a lot, but they're not perfect. So I don't want to say that, masks would have solved everything, but they might have meant that we bought ourselves some time to figure out more about what was going on and how dangerous this is. So we could have put other things in place to maybe stop those death peaks in spring from being as high as they unfortunately ended up being.
Thank you. Dan, someone would like to know, can you please explain why there are 3 vaccines? How are there 3 different vaccines for the same disease? Is this true of other diseases too?
Yeah, so that's an important issue. There are about 15 vaccines in sort of large-scale human trials at the moment. And the 3 that they're referring to are probably the Pfizer, Moderna, and the Oxford AstraZeneca ones that are in the public eye a lot right now, because those are the ones that are sort of slightly ahead of the game in getting approval for widespread use. So there are these 3 vaccines. They are all slightly different. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines work by injecting into you a small piece of genetic material which contains the information that makes your own cells start to produce one of the protein molecules naturally that are found in the coronavirus itself. That's called the spike protein. And then your body will start to make its own antibodies and T-cell response against that spike protein that then, if your body happens to be infected with the real virus that has that spike protein on it, your body should then hopefully react against that. So that's those 2 vaccines. The other vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca one, works slightly differently in that it is using a sort of type of cold virus normally in primates, not normally infecting humans, and they've added into that again some genetic material that gets to make the spike protein, and then that is given to you. So the vaccines are different. And what's really important to understand here, well, there's 2 things. One is our knowledge is great enough that we can make these vaccines, but at the outset, we didn't know exactly which one was going to work or not work. So placing lots of bets was a good idea. So that's why we have lots of different kinds of vaccines. And that is actually an amazing achievement from thousands of scientists across the globe to make all these different place lots of bets is a really good idea in this situation. Now we're in the fortunate position where the evidence so far is that more than one of these vaccines is working. And now we're in the fortunate position where it's very likely that the vaccines will work slightly better or worse in different situations. And having lots available is really important. So, for example, the Pfizer vaccine that is well been publicized as having the problem of it has to be kept at minus 70 degrees during its transport, that's not going to solve the problem globally, because across the world, there are many countries which are going to find it really hard to have the health infrastructure to maintain a virus at minus 70 degrees for very long before it's used. So it's really good that we have different versions of vaccines which look like they're working. And I think in time we'll also see that some of these vaccines might work better in certain groups of people. We're not there yet because there isn't a big enough data set for that. But I think in time that is something which is probably going to emerge, and so the different vaccines will also have a use for that reason as well. So it's really quite amazing that we have different vaccines that seem like they're working.
Thank you. I just saw someone, Zed's Dead, who on Twitter was just saying, I bet they didn't have all this expert analysis in 1918. There were a lot of other things they didn't have, and there were things that they did have, like that really enormous child mortality rate. This is, Kevin, this is, again, another tricky one, because predictive stuff I know is never, but someone would like to know, how bad do you think 2021 is going to be? I mean, what in terms of, and I know we're not going to hold you to any of your Mystic Meg-like predictions, but what are your expectations initially working within the health service? And I suppose in some ways that also gives you a chance to talk a little bit about how we should make sure that we don't just go, well, the vaccine's here, it's all going to be fine, which I know some people have felt that this is now we can just throw our hats up in the air and everything's going to be all right because we'll all get the vaccine when necessary.
Look, I mean, the short answer is I don't know. These predictions are very difficult to make, but I think the best metaphor for all of this has always been for me the forest fire, and it works very much like that, and it's depressingly well behaved as a pandemic, really, insofar as, there's plenty of dry forest left to burn, and we put out the flames, and you've got smouldering embers, and if you don't look after it, it bursts into flames again, and it keeps going and it keeps going. And so you cannot stop. You cannot think we're done and we're over. We're not done and out of this until we have something that approaches herd immunity out there through vaccination. And so, and certainly in the UK at the moment, we're at a pretty critical time. And I'm so pleased that we've moved so far and so fast with the development of the vaccines. But I've said this before, it is a celebration of the sort that you can have, if your team go 1-0 up in the first half of the World Cup final. It's too early. And we've got a very dangerous 3 months ahead of us, because everyone has to have the discipline. Everybody has to have the discipline to hold their nerve and to play by the rules. And we do this for all of us, right? So that thing that Chris Whitty said, which was brilliant, was, my risk is your risk. It's this collective idea of risk, and it's not like we don't understand that. We don't drink drive. We understand that, don't we, as a collective risk, as a risk to yourself and to other people. We wear seatbelts. We understand that some of the things we do for ourselves, and some of the things we do for other people. But this somehow we've lost this set of our collective responsibility, and it is about collective responsibility. It isn't about the risk that you as an individual bear. It is about the risk that you project back into society, back into the people who are most vulnerable. It is the risk you project back into the healthcare system by denying other people access to healthcare because we're too busy looking after COVID. So I cannot predict for you what 2021 is going to look like. And the thing I always say to people when they ask me this, that we are not out of the woods yet, but until the vaccine started to arrive, the woods were also on fire, and they're at least not on fire anymore, but we're not out of the woods.
Thanks, Kevin. Emma, do you think, looking at a positive side to it, is the one in terms of when something like this does happen, the advances in science, and I do know that, so many people, so many different institutions, when we're putting everything else down, we're just now focusing on this, and there's been a lot of kind of international, cooperation with this. Are we thinking in terms of both understanding living things, in terms of understanding viruses, has this got a broader advance to it of knowledge than merely dealing with COVID-19 on its own?
Yeah, so I would say that it most definitely does. And I think this is hopefully one of the good things we can pull out of this pandemic. Of course, one can argue, and I would argue, that you shouldn't need a pandemic to make these kinds of scientific advances. But since we are here and this is the situation we are in, it makes it all the more important that all of those who have been hurt and been killed by this pandemic, that we try and pull as much good out of that as we can. And one of the ways we can do that is through the scientific advances that we've made and hopefully will continue making. So one really big one is the ability to manufacture vaccines so quickly, to develop and manufacture vaccines so quickly. And mRNA vaccines are incredibly promising for the future. They look like they will, be a huge help to us here, but they're much easier to develop and to update than more traditional vaccine technologies. And so this could be a huge boon for many diseases worldwide, that we could start making mRNA vaccines for more than just COVID, and vaccines that are maybe, more easy to update and more easy to roll out than we have been previously. But we've also seen, I think, one thing that's really important to highlight, kind of what we can happen when we push aside some of the competitiveness and some of the kind of divisions that pull apart research and that can pull apart scientists. Everything, as you say, kind of everything has been pushed aside in the pursuit of doing more for COVID. And that has allowed us to make absolutely incredible advances. So imagine if we were able to do this for other diseases, for other problems in the world. And I think that to me, it's been really inspiring to see scientists come together globally to share data, to share collaborations, to kind of put the public good and the interests of the pandemic ahead of the kind of academic interests. But this is hard because long term, those incentives are there for reasons. We live within institutions that prioritize things that may not be in the public good, like sharing your data quickly rather than getting a really good publication which will help you get a job. So we do need to kind of keep this spirit going and make sure that this doesn't end when the pandemic ends, when we're all vaccinated and we're hopefully back to a normal life, that we're actually able to keep this spirit of collaboration, cooperation, open sharing, and kind of drive to get things done for the public good over our personal good or our institutional good. We shouldn't take this for granted. We should really concretely, push that forward so that we can do this for other diseases and other problems in society.
Thank you. Dan, another question, which is, why is it that COVID-19 seems so much worse than other coronaviruses?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. So that, that comes down to the basic science of what happens when you're infected with this particular coronavirus. And I would say that at the moment, we don't fully understand that. We still don't really fully understand what makes some people be asymptomatic, not have severe symptoms. Some people suffer severe symptoms, and of course some people sadly pass away with the virus, and we still don't really understand what the differences are in people's responses. That's not to say there's not been a lot of work on that. There is, I keep up with the immunology of what happens to your immune system when you're infected with the virus. And, there are new research papers published daily on the topic, but it hasn't come down to the level where there's a really easy answer as to what exactly happens. There are papers saying, you could group people into sort of 3 different categories, 7 different categories, according to this cell or that cell type, in moving into the lung and having an overactive response than it should do, etc. So there are lots of kind of theories on this and moving towards understanding. But I actually think that the short answer to that question is is that we don't quite know. But I just wanted to also pick up on something that Kevin said, well, also Emma also pointed out, which is this sort of emphasis that we're not out of the woods yet. And I fully agree with that. But it's also true for another important reason, which perhaps hasn't come up yet, which is that although all of us, and me included, are sort of welcoming the vaccines coming through, and Kevin was rightly pointing out that the next 3 months are absolutely critical before we even get to a widespread use of the vaccines. Even with the vaccines that are coming through, we're not out of the woods yet because we don't know, for example, how long the protection lasts with the vaccines. And so it's really important that there's overwhelming hope, but obviously that we for many reasons, actually, we're not out of the woods there. It's the fact that we've got to sort it out globally, the fact that we don't yet know how well the vaccine protects us for how long. We don't know whether the vaccine prevents transmission of the virus. There are many, many unknowns, and science, there's a long way for science to really bring us out of all of this in many levels, including the question you just asked, which is exactly understanding what makes people do better or worse when they're infected with the virus.
Now, this one is a hands-up one, because I don't know if any of you will have an answer for this, and I don't want to throw it individually to someone, which is just, do we know anything? I was talking to a friend of mine, Spencer, who had COVID quite early on in the pandemic and seems to have fully physically recovered. And yet every now and again he finds he goes to a thing that was previously something he liked, for instance, say a whiskey, and he goes, God, I hate the taste of that now. Now, of course, we know in the early stages there is this, the loss of the ability to experience flavours, etc. But do we know anything about why people, and he's not the only one, there's a few people I've spoken to who seem to have fully physically recovered, but now find themselves recoiling at flavours which previously they enjoyed? Who's going to put their hand up for that one? Kevin, you put your hand up by mistake. You fool! You're going to have to make up some rubbish instead.
Yes, thanks for that, Robin. So I was having this discussion with a friend of mine who's a neurologist up in Sheffield, and the fine science of this is again unknown. It's really interesting. Your olfactory nerve, the nerve that is responsible for your sense of smell, is the forwardmost projection of your brain. It projects right out there, and it is the area of your brain that is most exposed to what you breathe in, basically, and so it is exposed to that pathogen. So beyond that, the fundamental mechanism we don't understand. We don't understand, like many things, but this is a strange virus in many ways, and in the way that it behaves, and coming back to the earlier question about why this one's been so bad. So at a fundamental biological level, we still aren't sure, but the character of this infection has been markedly different from previous coronaviruses. Even the SARS virus of 2003, insofar as it's really horribly efficient. And when we think of an efficient virus, you think, oh, well, something that kills you very easily, but that's not true. So a virus that kills you very quickly and very easily after you've been infected actually tends to stay endemic within a population because those people never move around long enough to spread it. But this is one that allows you to spread, and not just spread when you don't even know you've got it. So SARS-1 in 2003, you tended to be maximally infective by the time that you were maximally sick. So by the time you were actually maximally infected, you're already inside hospital, which is why we actually saw so very many casualties amongst healthcare workers in 2003, for only a few hundred deaths worldwide. But with SARS-CoV-2 responsible for COVID-19, we're seeing people able to spread while they're very well, may not even ever know they've got it, and then a virus that is lethal to a substantial fraction, a big enough fraction of people that you can cause this widespread. It's a widespread pandemic. If you wanted to tweak all the variables in what a virus should be to make it maximally efficient to cause a pandemic, SARS-CoV-2 is pretty close to it. So, at a fundamental level, a lot of these things remain unknown as to precisely what it is about the virus that does that, but the characteristics of it are very clear, and this is what it does, and this is why I've had to take it seriously.
And I think this question, I'm going to throw this just to you, Kevin, first as well, and please others do join in afterwards, but it feels that you're the person who's been closest to this, which is someone's interested in knowing what other ways have we found in terms of improving how we treat people with COVID-19 over the last few months?
Yeah, so look, for our frontline clinical teams, this has been the mother of all steep learning curves, you know, and I still have trouble, you know, comprehending what it was like. I do still remember leaving the hospital in you know, early March when we realized it was on its way and realizing what we were in for, but only reading the reports of what was coming out of Italy, but knowing that that was coming our way. And then as it washed up, watching people trying to work, you know, we don't have a playbook for COVID-19. We didn't have. And so every day it was all the running that anyone could do just to stay in the same spot. So the mainstay of this treatment for people who are very, very unwell is to support them if they need support with either more oxygen or support with their breathing. And because, you know, first and foremost, this causes a respiratory virus. And that's what we do in intensive care. When people are exhausted, effectively, we give them a rest and we support their physiology by artificial means. It's a remarkable thing, really. We have discovered along the way that fortuitously, or not fortuitously, because it was part of a proper clinical trial, that dexamethasone, a very cheap, very well-known, very well-understood drug, actually has a significant impact in the mortality here. So that's fantastic news. You know, this is not a bleeding-edge technology drug. This is something that we've been using all the time. We understand it, and that modifies the disease to give us an edge. It's not a panacea by any means. We have some better ideas about how to apply the mechanical support that we do for ventilation, mechanical ventilation, intubation, etc. We have some promising drugs out that are antiviral drugs. But again, as is the same story across the whole of this pandemic, there is no, and there will be no magic bullet. This is you know, it's difficult to use war as a metaphor, but this is a battle that we will win in incremental steps, in marginal gains. It requires us to throw around dexamethasone, us to know how to ventilate people, us to spot people before they get badly ill, us to test and trace people in an efficient way. It requires the public to do their bit, to have our backs, to stop us getting overwhelmed. It requires people to wear masks. It requires people to respect social distancing. It requires people to understand that we are genuinely all in this together. And if any of us drop the ball, you know, Dan and Emma's side on the science, my side on the front line, clinical, the public on their side and the prevention, we're done. We're done. And so it is all of that together until the end. And there is nothing, no one's going to turn up with drug X and say, forget about it, stop worrying. That's not how this works. And you know, if I can say only one thing, it would be that.
Thank you. And then just we're nearly out of time. I'd like to ask all of you, starting with you, Emma, in terms of what do you think is the most useful advice that you can currently give to people watching this in the current situation? And also, if there's anywhere in particular for people when they're trying to find the most accurate information, where are the best places for them to go?
So my advice would be something that I feel like I've been shouting about since May: aerosols. And I feel like we still are not talking enough about aerosols, about the risk of being in rooms with other people, and how much you can decrease that risk by wearing masks, decreasing the number of people in that room, opening up windows and doors, making sure you ventilate those spaces. I think we really have underestimated in the early part of the epidemic how many transmissions took place in these closed scenarios. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, we were all busy, you know, disinfecting our couches when the virus was in the air floating around, and that's where we need to stop it. And I think, unfortunately, we still aren't really approaching this enough in society. possibly because economically it is not a good thing, because in some situations it's probably not possible to make those areas safe. But even whatever restrictions are in place in whatever country you're in, it's really important the public know what the risks are so that they can decide whether they want to take them and reduce them where possible. As far as where to go for information, that's a really tough one, because one of the problems with COVID-19 is that it's so cutting edge that oftentimes, there isn't kind of one place where someone has compiled all of the latest scientific data. I think following some of your favorite scientists on Twitter is a great way to keep up with kind of the latest things, the latest studies, the latest news that's going around, but also following, high quality publications, news agencies that have done good reporting in the past on COVID-19 are continuing to put out great articles about the problems today and the latest scientific advances. And I would really recommend those can be some great places to get up-to-date information on the latest things that we're learning in science and in health.
And Dan, we've got 1 minute left.
Okay, sorry. My advice would be to really, it's much easier early on because it was warm weather and it was fresh. And now we're in the really hard bit because it's winter. You want to see your parents or grandparents, and they're elderly and they're lonely and it's really difficult. But you have to be really careful in the next few months because I do believe we're turning a corner in being able to treat this disease, but we're not there yet. And the next few months are really, really, really critical. So please do take care. The rules are kind of a minimum of what you should do, is my feeling on that. Try to just, look after yourself and your family and stay safe for a few months. If Christmas happens in June, that'll be okay. The Christmas party, I mean, or Hanukkah party. And in terms of where to get advice, I'm no fan of the government on many levels, but I think the government does put out solid advice. They have to. It's, that's what the government advice on what to do around COVID-19 is got to be well thought out. It goes through lots of checks. My feeling is it's important to listen to what's going on, and other reputable places, the BBC News, for example. There are, of course, learned societies. The British Society of Immunology puts out a lot of more specialised information. The Academy of Medical Sciences. Sorry, that was probably a bit more than a minute.
That's all right. It always is. That's what I love about you, Dan. I really recommend Dan's books, by the way. They are an absolute joy, and you always have so much that you want to share, and it's always very valid as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin. By the way, a lot of people have been tweeting as well to say thank you very much, and thank you to all of the frontline workers and all of those people, not merely working in the NHS, a lot of people working with old people, a lot of people that I know who are working with children sometimes who are quite poorly, all of the people who are really putting themselves at maximum risk and often at the highest cost in terms of also for the rest of their life in terms of making sure that one thing they're focusing on their job. So thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you very much everyone for joining us.